My name's Paul Rogers. I chair an organisation called Vendorcom, a forum and a hub in the European payment scene. I'm not going to talk about it, but if you want to know more, I'll be around after the session. I also sit on the UK Payment Systems Regulators Advisory Board, and so regulation, legislation is an area of particular interest to me. And I'm the payments ambassador to Europe for the World Wide Web Consortium. So I've got a fairly broad understanding of the payments world, but it probably only goes about this deep. And the opportunity here this afternoon is to hear from experts that really know how to take specific subjects to a depth that I can only dream of. So what I'm going to do in terms of making sure that we stay focused in the 35 or 40 minutes that we've got remaining before we close everything up is I'm going to ask each of the individual panelists to introduce themselves in really no more than about a minute and a half. And then I've got a few key subjects that I think we should talk about based on the sessions that I've been in and some of the feedback that I've had from those sessions that I haven't been able to attend. And I hope that we'll be able to go out to some of your questions as well so that we can wrap this up in a way that gives you what you need when you go back to the office and your business and the real world tomorrow. So I'm going to start at the far end with Andrew. Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself and about the BRC.
Okay, so I'm Andrew Cregan. I'm the head of payments policy at the British Retail Consortium, and the BRC is the trade body in the UK representing the retail industry. So we have around 5,000 members and represent around half of UK retail by turnover.
Great. Nick.
Hi everybody, my name is Nick Telford-Reid. I now work as an independent consultant, professional troublemaker in the payment space. But previously I was head of enterprise architecture and innovation at WorldPay.
Great, thank you. Michael.
Michael O'Loughlin, I'm the token Irishman, and I am bringing diversity to the group. My role is, I guess, chief storyteller for a startup called Token, and we believe we are trailblazing and bringing that story to the masses, not just in the UK, but beyond. We're San Francisco originally. Created a technology looking for a problem. Along came PSD2. That's proved to be certainly the catalyst for open banking and indeed our story. Thank you.
Jeremy.
So really glad that there's not a hard border between the two chairs here. I'm Jeremy King, I'm International Director Europe for PCI Security Standards Council. We look after the PCI DSS and a whole range of payment security standards.
Great, good.
Hi everyone, my name's Angus Burrell. I'm the General Manager in the UK for a company called Valitor. We're an international omni-channel payment solutions business focusing on the consumer all across Europe and pulling together payment technology and infrastructure specifically for retailers.
First of all, I resent this accusation of the lack of diversity because actually there are people on the panel with beards and some people without beards.
Brown shoes and black shoes.
There are some people with glasses, some people without glasses. So it's a little less of this diversity talk. It's a very diverse panel. I'm Dave Birch. I'm Global Ambassador for Consult Hyperion, which is a specialist electronic transactions consultancy that advises the mass market players, the schemes and WorldPay and banks on how to make the best use of new technologies.
Thank you, an experienced panel, and looking forward to hearing from them. Now, having looked out across the agenda and the various topics that we've dealt with over the last few days, we could touch on so many different areas. The one area, there's two areas that have really risen to the top over the last few days. One is PSD2, and in particular, the regulatory technical standards for strong customer authentication. It's been one of the most topical areas on Twitter. And I'm just keen to hear from the audience, from the panel, about where are we on this? We have got 205 days before what I'm predicting as a consumer commerce car crash. Is that correct? or are there real things that we can do from tomorrow to get that moving? Dave, why don't you kick that one off?
Well, I think, I mean, car crash, I'm not sure. I think there'll be two effects. So first of all, some people are already doing great stuff in this space. So let's be clear, it's not a wasteland. I mean, I bought my British Airways ticket Saturday it was, and British Air, they've already got the Amex whitelist. I forgot what the proper word for it. It's the Amazon list. What do they call it? The exemption list, or whatever it's called. So. Express list. So when I went to buy my last plane ticket with my Amex card, a box popped up, which basically, I can't remember exactly what it said, but basically said, do you want us to pester you to death with nonsense because of idiotic rules from Brussels, or click here? And I just clicked here. Amex had brought up all the merchants I'd spent money at in the last year or something, and I just clicked one button and it whitelisted a lot of them and done. So some people have got hold of this and started doing great things. I think the main implication, I don't know what you guys think about it, but I think what will actually happen is it will accelerate the convergence onto the mobile, because the only realistic way of implementing SCA for most people in this space at most points in the value chain is through the mobile, and that will drive all of the transactions onto the mobile, and basically that's good because it'll be more secure, but it sort of won't matter if you're in the shop or on the web or on the phone, because whatever you do, right, you'll end up putting your thumb on your phone or looking at the phone or whatever, and then for most customers, actually that's okay.
Actually, I want to come to Nick on this, because I know we are great, we love the mobile and so on, but there's a real world out there, and I'm seeing a lot of innovation, and we haven't even begun to communicate to the real people in the world, because we're not real, we're really not real. What are your views? Because you work with real people, don't you?
I'm going to disagree with Dave a little bit, because that's fun. I have a problem with mobile being the cornerstone of payments in Europe, because I think that is a colossal problem for financial inclusion. I think it's a problem for people with cognitive impairment. I think it's a problem across a range of different sets of people. You know, cards has proliferated as a set of technologies, because fundamentally a card is a few tens of cents to produce, and they're pretty easy to use. I'm genuinely astonished that the financial regulator, the consumer regulator, hasn't kind of twigged yet that they're forcing the UK payments industry down a route that will require a £1,000 smartphone to engage with the payments industry. That, for me, feels extraordinary. I mean, I agree. For people like us, for professionals, for the middle class, for the well-educated, for the rich, mobile payments, fantastic. But I think outside of that kind of core population, SCA will bring all sorts of unintended consequences, which I'm genuinely quite concerned about.
So one of the things we're seeing here is but perhaps a switch to say, well, actually, that's going to affect the card payments. And we know it's all digital payments, but what opportunities is that going to open up for
non-cards?
Direct to bank account payments,
Sure.
and the wider side, and maybe bring Michael in on this one as well.
It's an interesting one. As we try and be politically correct and not mention Brexit, look, we start.
No, please mention
No,
Brexit.
I do think that
There hasn't been enough talk about that.
financial inclusion. I haven't heard that, and I've gone to a few sessions, so it's good to bring that up. It's banking the unbanked, being inclusive. I think that's really important. I think, however, that is an opportunity in itself to lower the price of smartphones, enter new competitor stage left. That's. There's a phrase, it's used in many of these scenarios, like a broken record, but the light bulb wasn't created through the continuous modernization of the candle. And I think what we're trying to do right now with all these legacy systems is put lipstick on a pig. We're gradually putting on new post-internet technology on top of pre-internet technology. So these legacy systems are just there, and rather than ripping out the beating heart of the bank, is what bankers tell me, and I'm a recovering banker, I would say that the opportunity really is to actually look to the new banks and try and replicate them. So the likes of the Starlings of the world I admire greatly, because they're actually doing that. Now, I'm intentionally saying that because I think it needs to be said. If you look beyond that, yesterday there was a great quote from one of the ladies who was on your panel, Dave, Nadia, she spoke about, well, whose job is it to educate people on open banking? This is something as well that all ties back to this. Open banking is a mindset, but really those with a commercial interest shouldn't really be educating anybody. And I think that's another risk that is at play, but the opportunity goes into the use cases.
Well, we're very good in these environments of speaking to ourselves and then struggling to take it out into the real world. And coming back to that, how are we going to get real innovation? And it could be legislative innovation, it could be technical innovation. How are we actually going to get real level of adoptions? I've got lots of private equity and venture capital companies coming to me and saying, look, I invested in this neo-fintech company in 2010, 2012, and they told me they were going to be 60, 70, 80% market share within 3 to 5 years, and it hasn't happened. We know that it was never going to happen.
Regulation doesn't necessarily stifle innovation. It actually brings together groups of profit-making institutions and compels them to, well, report and be good for the public. That's all of us who have bank accounts in this case. And I think if you look at the check debacle, let's call it out, in the UK, I was part of that lovely project with KPMG back in the day, and the rug was pulled from under us and told, actually, we're going to keep checks because of financial inclusion. I don't know where you guys sit on that. The current account switch service. If you look at these large-scale programs, there are 87 financial institutions forced to actually let people change their bank accounts within 5 working days. It was a nightmare from an architectural point of view. We're in the same boat with open banking, except it's global payments. And when we have these walled gardens of real-time payments not talking to each other, trying to compete, and then even within the domestic side of it, as a startup, we go out to the banks, they all build their own APIs to compete. If you go to the central banks, they say, well, we can't actually mandate anything to happen. And if you look at the UK, they tried to do it with the 9 largest banks, but what's happened is 17 different build-outs of APIs have created a mess for the customer.
So, I want to end on a fairly positive note as we go away from the event. But Jeremy, what are your thoughts in terms of how we bring some of this together?
I'm going to go back to your original question there. Yeah. And so, as a representative of a standards body, I know the challenges of bringing some of this stuff through. And PSD2 would be wonderful if we all operated and worked in a very simple way that the people who wrote PSD2 thought we did. And as soon as you move out of that, that's when the problems start arising. So the likes of, where you don't know the final amount, that is going to be an issue. And you think, well, there's not so many of that until you think, well, hang on a moment, how many people go online and order their shopping from one of the big supermarkets, and you order it and you pay for it, and the shopping turns up and there's like, we haven't got this, so we've swapped it for that, and it's £1 less. Instantly, you've got problems. So you're in areas, and this is a beautiful example of where you're pushing how we do payments and where payments work and how they can interact, that just take it out from the normal remit of the standards process. For us as a standards body, we're having to look at that, the impacts of that, and how we can change it. And we change a heck of a lot quicker than a regulator. So that's the problem, that they've come in with this a bit of a closed mindset of this is it, go do it, and there's so many that just don't fit. So that's going to be the challenge.
And that's a good point. I'm going to bring Dave in here briefly, and then I'm going to go to Andrew, because you were talking about some of the complexity of the payment system earlier.
Jeremy's point illustrates quite well the sort of what the regulatory envelope is actually going to end up shaping, because messing around, like when you check into the hotel and they do a pre-auth and whatever, this is 1960s junk that's being and Once Tesco have got access to your bank account, all of that stuff goes away. So, you'll have your little Tesco thing and they say, can I have access to your bank account? Don't want to bother Visa and MasterCard because they're jolly busy with all those transactions. You say okay, and then all of those problems disappear, because when Tesco show up, they'll take the money from your account. Actually, they'll get you to push the money to them, and they can refund you through the same direction. So I'm in terms of like the actual service that's delivered to consumers, I'm quite optimistic about that, because I think the genuine competition that's coming into the space is actually going to result in those better services. the specific question about how we educate the public on these kind of things, I wouldn't even bother. I mean, I got the letter from Barclays about something to do with, I can't remember when it was, SCA or something, and I had literally no idea what they were talking about, and I know everything about this stuff. You know, so those letters, sending the members of the public letters about this is not going to help at all. You know, if you're going to talk about financial inclusion, in large parts of the UK, if you want to send people letters about SCA or whatever, you're going to have to spend 5 years teaching them to read first. You know, so the idea that this is a viable, just ignore them. Just get on with it. Just tell
Champion
them.
of inclusion, Dave Birch.
Who is this? You're saying, oh, it's for people who haven't got smartphones. Nobody in this audience cares about people who haven't got smartphones.
Well, that's a real challenge, and I don't think we can be elitist like that.
That's not elitist.
I think it is.
People
I think
with
it's
smartphones
discriminatory and
is
elitist.
everybody. It's 99% of the population.
I think Dave doesn't represent everyone on the panel when he says that.
I want to come back. I want to come to Andrew because your members in the British Retail Consortium and merchant organizations across beyond retail into hospitality into all these different varied market sectors have got different demographics trying to make payments with different technologies, different types, different mindsets. How are your members meeting this challenge that we're lobbing in to them?
Well, I think there's obviously a payment mix that for the retail industry at least is vastly dominated by card payments, and so yes, for the PSD2, strong customer authentication for the online environment. That's the SCA is going to present a number of real challenges. But as I mentioned on the panel this morning, most of the most prominent concerns from our members actually come from the costs associated with accepting that most dominant form of payment. So the regulation as it stands is completely inadequate at addressing the complexities of the card payment system, what we're looking for in the review of the interchange fee regulation. And one of the things we would have been looking for in the PSR's, the UK's payment systems regulators market review was a simplification of regulation, of card regulation, and to deal with all the carve-outs and complexities that are involved in it, to bring commercial cards in scope, to bring all transactions in scope, whether they're domestic transactions, intra-regional EEA transactions, or transactions from cards issued in the rest of the world as interregional transactions, to cover card present transactions and card not present transactions, a new caveat that's been introduced in the European Commission's deal with Visa and MasterCard on interregional fees. We need to have regulation that spans the whole gamut of card payments on the basis that that is the premise on which a merchant, a retailer accepts a card. We don't inspect, to repeat what I said this morning, a merchant doesn't take your card off you and ask you if that's a commercial card, ask you where your card was issued. We need to have legislation that meets the needs of merchants, of retailers in terms of the way that they actually handle card payments.
I'm going to come back, if we've got time, to look at choice, because one of the things the regulator says, we want choice, and actually the industry is saying, let's give people choice. And I'm not convinced that choice is necessarily the best thing. But actually, I guess you were talking about this customer experience side of things in your presentation yesterday. That's a really interesting metric that you're looking at. How do you think, when we look at SCA and open banking and choices of cards and fees and everything else, that we can start to begin to give commonality and just confidence and trust and extend all these good things we expect in payments in your metric of customer experience?
Yeah, okay, so I think, and that is something that we're looking at, we're calling APEX, the after-payment emotional experience, as being one of the most important parts of a payment of post-transaction. And I think there is an element, whilst I love technology, I love payment technology, that's why hopefully I'm doing what I'm doing, I think consumers really don't care about technology. They care about something completely seamless and getting what they want when they want it. And there is an element, the last 3 days, there's some amazing technologies out there. There's a lot of great things going on with PSD2. We've got a lot of retailers, perhaps even smaller retailers, who probably don't even know what PSD1 is, let alone PSD2. And David, you were on a panel yesterday talking about PSD3.
We're all about PSD3.
So quite how far that's going to go, or whether we're going to enable retailers to sort of keep up with themselves and their legacy systems in order to deliver for consumers a really smooth, seamless payment option wherever they are, to pay however they want, whenever they want. I don't know if we're sort of jumping ahead with some of the technologies we're using. And I think it would be important to allow retailers, probably in terms of regulation, etc., to keep up with themselves, get their legacy systems up to date, or put new systems in place which can actually work in a better way with some of the modern latest smaller businesses, smaller bits of technology which are coming into play.
So back to Paul's car crash analogy, we don't want the poor consumer to have post-transaction stress disorder.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, I like that.
Yeah,
Get that out on Twitter.
on the next
Get
slide.
that out on Twitter.
I think, Andrew and I have disagreed about this before, but I think if we agree, so let's just take it as read. Let's just say there is some sort of market failure, which means the price of certain financial services is higher than you might otherwise expect in a completely competitive market. I'm not saying it is, but let's just say it is. The two obvious ways of dealing with that are some sort of communist price fixing, which Andrew is talking about, which if it applies to financial services, why wouldn't it apply to, if the government's going to set the price of accepting a card transaction, why don't they fix the cost of bread or petrol? Or that doesn't seem right.
Because the provision of bread is a competitive market, whereas the duopoly in card payments is not.
But then don't take them. Take open banking or PSD2, or why don't you get an M-Pesa license for the UK? Or the real solution to this problem long term is more competition in the payments market. It's not. If we want to drive down the cost for the market participants, then the way to do it is more competition, not more regulation. So I feel very militant.
So Andrew, on that, how do you think, what could you be offering, or how can merchants come together to actually tackle what Dave's saying and saying that actually we can bring more things in?
Yeah, in terms of introducing competition, we welcome initiatives. We welcome open banking and the number of firms that are going through the process in the UK at the moment. I think there's around 39 payment initiation service providers or companies that hope to be payment initiation service providers. But as it stands at the moment, nobody's using this channel of payment. And what is going to be the market share for that channel of payment in the future? As I've pointed out, 76% of retail transactions are card transactions today, and pretty much the rest of it is cash. And so if we're going to be moving away from card transactions, then we'd welcome that. But there's nothing actually wrong with the way that cards operate, apart from the fact that they are not regulated properly. There is a market failure here, and there's a government failure at the level of European institutions, at the member state level from governments and their regulators, because we've just failed to get on top of this situation where Visa and MasterCard can hike up their fees at 39% a year, 70% a year. If you would see that same situation taking place in your utility bills, if you'd seen that same situation taking place in mobile phone bills, you'd either leave that company, you'd fire that company, and you'd move on to somebody else. But you can't do that with card payments. We can't just walk away, as Dave suggests, because everybody's got a Visa or MasterCard card.
Well, actually, on that point, I'm going to come to the question because it's directly relevant, I think. There are people out there that are looking to offer you alternative mechanisms. Yeah. Michael might be one. Adyen launched their PSD2 system with KLM. It's happening. So what's the market potential for taking those up? Is it going to be a slow burn, or how's that going to? What's the transition to get that adopted at a mass level?
I don't think there's one answer across Europe. I mean, I think there are some countries where the transition will be relatively straightforward, where there's innate distrust in the card brands, for example. So, I mean, let's take Germany. It's a great example. It's a huge economy, and yet actually card penetration here is much lower than in some other countries in Europe. So and it's no coincidence that the Berlin Group, which is one of the prime movers in the banking API space, is based here. So I think there's a mood amongst consumers, an appetite amongst consumers here. I think there's much less appetite in some other European markets because payments are culturally mediated, right? How you desire to make a payment is a learned behavior, and it takes a long time to kind of shift those behaviors around. So if we can build APIs, and if we can build user experiences that are familiar, irrespective of the payment instrument you want to use, then I think there's really some traction in things like access to account.
So I'm really conscious we've only got about 10 minutes left, and there's a whole flurry of questions coming through here. If I can ask one or two of the panel members just to let's tackle some of these. Let's look at the. Actually, can you scroll to there was another one that I want to tackle first. Yeah, so Dave, just very briefly on this Danish local scheme. We were hearing this week about, the last few days, about payments becoming increasingly local. Are we going to see little local preference schemes come up?
No, I don't think you will. Dancort's it's a bank monopoly on debit, so regulating the price of monopolies is a different thing. No, I don't, because I actually think the role of the merchants is going to change. On day one, the presentation that we saw from IATA and Deutsche Bank, I thought was a very... that was something radically new that we haven't seen at this conference before in the past. And the idea that the big merchants, and actually groups of merchants, will come together to take advantage of this more competitive environment, I think that's something genuinely new in the space, and I actually think it's genuinely exciting. And when you look at the new technology that was outside, and there's interesting new technology around, I mean, there's a robot that brings you fudge, for example, which is something I've actually dreamt about at some point in the past. If you look at the new technology out there, it's not going to change the business as much as what the IATA Deutsche Bank thing represented. The ability for to create genuinely new competition in this space is so much more interesting than the little technological changes.
So Andrew, just briefly, I know you've been doing some work on bringing some of the merchants together to look at whether there's PISP or AISP capability. Has that got legs?
Well, open banking payment initiation service solutions do have legs. It's the question is, how do we develop the critical mass behind it in order to make this a viable solution so that it's interoperable across as many merchants as possible, and that the solution that we provide has all the functionalities that people currently receive and that they expect from any new payment method. And so, one of the things that we've been looking at is essentially a list of retail industry requirements from open banking payment initiation service solutions, and in that way we can take that forward to any payment service provider as a manifesto, if you like, from the retail industry for what we're looking at with this new payment channel. It's something that is going to take time to reach the level of maturity, though, I think that we have in other payment channels. Just as an example, refunds on a payment initiation service provider is something that's currently very tricky with the standards that are in place. That's something that needs to develop in a new iteration.
And that's exactly the point I was going to raise. Over the last few days, we've heard lots about, faster payments, but we haven't heard people talking about when faster payments go wrong. And I work in the area of trying to prevent credit card fraud. We've had a great session this morning talking about that, talking about the cyber criminals. The cyber criminals exist to get money. And here is a brand new way to have the cash sent directly to them. And for the consumer, once it goes wrong, with a credit card, they just go, I'll charge that back because I didn't receive that, or that was broken, or that company's gone out of business, and you get the refund. Faster payments, from what I'm hearing, you've got to sue somebody. Seriously? That is not a consumer process.
We've got a very interesting landscape developing, and the request to pay question here is interesting. I can see a situation where it's going to be broadly the same as we're getting in payments.
Can I give you one example? So in one of the other jurisdictions that I'm working in, not the UK, I'm working on a request to pay overlay on the faster payment service. And actually it will be different because the request to pay is coming in over a 222 service. So the request to pay, so at the moment, when I get my Amex bill at the end of the month and I see British Airways £35, like, what the fuck was this? I go and click on it, like, what was that for? And you click on it, there's nothing there. And you ring up Amex and say, well, what was that for? And they don't know either, because there's nothing there. Well, with request to pay, it won't be like that, because the request to pay will come in with the ticket, itinerary, invoice, and everything else. And so what customers will see, I think, is that when you pay for something with your card, you get your statement at the end of the month, whatever. But when I pay with my Tesco wallet, which will be built on a request to pay service, at the end of the month I can click on it, I can scroll through all my receipts, see everything I bought, feed it into my own. So I think customers will see a difference with this sort of thing. I mean,
that isn't the use case that I think you're talking about, right? The issue is actually when goods aren't shipped, or the authentication was faked, or it's that mechanism for disputes that I think you're talking about.
This is one of the things where I understand, Andrew, where you're coming from, but I think we need to recognize that the card payment system has built up the way it has over many years, and to create an internationally interoperable, secure, protecting the consumer, ubiquitous solution that is at relatively low cost is something that PSD2 solutions, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, will take some time to actually reach that level of maturity.
I just I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to leave without, I'm not here to scare. And you said I may have started a bit negatively, not the intention. I think there's an opportunity to use the word that was most used at this conference, which is collaboration. We actually need to genuinely use conferences like this to have meaningful conversations with actions. Yeah. Not steering committees about meetings will turn into a giant Dilbert cartoon and we'll be laughing at each other. But the sad reality, the next generation need us to be making decisions today. And I know that I'm passionate about payments, and no one outside of this room cares about payments. But, there is a technological revolution going on. The large players in technology are in the United States. We know who they are. We know who they are in China, for example, as well. And they're not taking each other on in their home ground. They're taking each other on in battleground Europe. And the sad story is the banks are there for the taking as new licenses are picked up. Now, we can run and we can be full of fear, or we can just accept defeat, or we can actually look at this and go, let's come together, especially at a time where our EU is under scrutiny by certain countries, and that's okay too. But we have an opportunity to work together, and I genuinely mean this. We need to bring this up a higher level and realize there's an opportunity to work together and fix this.
And I agree with you, and I'd actually like to, just as we round off in literally the last 2 to 3 minutes, look at what that collaborative landscape looks like. How do we bring Andrew and the rest of the merchants into this? How do we bring the other influencers? Like, Nick, you are working with the World Wide Web Consortium as leading the payments team. Where do standards like that, where do international bodies contribute to that?
Absolutely. So thank you for that beautiful segue. The World Wide Web, which is Tim Berners-Lee's organization for standards on the open web, we've been doing some work there for the last 3 or 4 years, trying to create an open ecosystem where there be a standard way of making a payment, but what the payment rails are, what the payment instrument is, that's for individual ecosystem players to elaborate. And, you talked about the big technology giants. So we've got Apple, we've got Google, we've got Microsoft, we've got Mozilla, we've got Samsung, we've got all the schemes by UnionPay.
And all animals are equal, some are more equal than others.
But there's an extension. So we've managed, the big battle that we've won there is this extension point called payment handler. So it's not just the browser that controls the experience. Anybody who owns a payment instrument can build a payment handler, and you can jump off into that. And that's a perfect opportunity for direct credit transfer and for this new world of open APIs. I'm
really conscious of time. I would have loved to come out face-to-face for questions. These sessions, and I'll be recommending it for future years, should be, I don't know, 2 hours long. We really got to get into the depth of some of these things. We've just scratched the surface. 6 of you standing here now have a wealth of viewpoints. If you were sitting in this audience, for the folks that are sitting in this audience, what would you say as they go back to their office tomorrow? What would be your main recommendation for the most pressing thing that they should be addressing in terms of their understanding of the payments landscape? Dave, start with you.
Well,
30 seconds each.
If I was Andrew, I'd be lobbying for the introduction of a central bank digital currency rather than lobbying the card schemes. I think having something like M-Pesa or PayPal, but run by the Bank of England, is the obvious way to minimize those costs. But for the people here, I would say, based on the last couple of days, by far the most important thing is PSD2 and open banking. I think a lot of people in the audience possibly, because it was something thought maybe it was something sort of technical to do with APIs and so on, so possibly didn't take on board quite what a structural change in the industry is. So, yeah, my focus would be open banking.
I'd say, I think if, it depends on who you are in the audience, of course. If you are a supplier to or someone in the payments industry, I'd say absolutely understand the regulations and understand the way where regulations are going, but more importantly, understand those businesses that you are serving, that you're providing your services to. And if you're a merchant or a retailer of any type, I think the most important thing is to use the advice of experts that you've got around you. There's a lot of great consultancies out there who can give you, hopefully, some impartial advice, but also...
Very wise words.
Also, I don't know the names of any of them, but I would also say the most important thing is understand your consumer. There's not, we talk about payments and we must have this or we must have that. Not every consumer, is shopping with every brand, wants the same thing. So, don't feel that you need to do something just because everyone's talking about it. Understand your business, your brand, your consumer, and then try and act accordingly within the realms of the regulation.
Wise words. Jeremy.
PCI has succeeded over the years because of collaboration. So I'm going to borrow you. I'm going to pinch your last words there, sir. There's so many areas where you can compete, but getting the payment systems working, getting them working efficiently, effectively, securely, that's where all of us in this room need to collaborate, need to cooperate, because then we can make it work, because the criminals are out there. And they are hitting us in every which way they can. So anything new comes along, they just see that as a great new opportunity. So we've got to work together to make these things work and help improve the security of all the payment processes.
Michael, thank you, Jeremy. Michael.
I'd say know the new rules, comply, innovate with an added value that has a competitive advantage once you've complied. That's how you'll survive. And look beyond your bubble, your industry bubble. Look to where we all look to, which is we all have our vested interests as individuals, but look beyond the bubble domestically, internationally. And once you do that, you'll start to see we're all global citizens, and this is global payments.
Nick.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more that actually all of us need to be led by consumers. So, I mean, I would argue, I think, that the most democratic, most open, lowest barriers to entry channel for the broadest range of consumers is the web. But actually, more generally, I mean, looking around the room, I sit in a lot of meetings, doing a lot of international standards and collaboration, and it's all great. And it keeps us, we go around this little merry circus around the world. But actually, how many organizations in this room are actually engaged in those processes? And then when things happen, you kind of go, oh, I wasn't expecting that. So, I mean, if you want to be masters of your destiny, then then get your folk, your product folk, your technology folk out into the world and start helping build some of these tools for collaboration.
And Andrew, for 30 seconds.
I would encourage people to go back to their markets and engage in the opportunities that there are for competition in the payment system. Things like request to pay in the UK, open banking, instant payments, SEPA instant payments, but also make your voice heard and make your concerns known back in your markets with regards to your key concerns. And I think for everywhere that's going to be card payments and card regulation. I think we need to see a step change the world over in the way that governments and regulators deal with card payment schemes and their abuse of their dominant market position.
Thank you, Andrew. As we round things up, I would echo what the panel has said. As I look out across the payments industry, I would encourage you to lift your head high. There's no point in reacting to things that are this close in, and there are plenty of opportunities to see what's coming down the line. So make sure that you're not surprised by things. Find your voice, as has been said. Get out there, lobby, and help educate ignorant regulators. And I use that, apologies if there are any regulators there, but it's not your fault you're ignorant. It's because the payments industry needs to get out there and educate and help you understand this immensely complex environment that we all live in. Payments isn't just generic payments for generic merchants. It's very detailed nuances, and you live within a small area of that, and you've got the right to have your voice heard as much as anybody else. Collaborate with those. I really like that term. VendorCom is built on the premise of promoting innovation through collaboration, and I would endorse that. I think there's a balance to be achieved, though, between listening to the consumer and only taking that viewpoint, and our responsibility as a competent payments ecosystem to lead and to demonstrate what the art of the possible really is. And it's getting that balanced view right, which I believe will see us succeed at the end of the day. And it's about understanding that whilst we've got a great bunch of experts here, it's the collective intelligence in this room that will really make a difference to those people that really matter, and those are the people beyond these four walls. So I'd encourage you to take everything that you've learned over the last 3 days, because this has been an excellent event once again, and take it and apply it to your business where you can, and where you can't, seek to be a shaper of the payments industry. We've been seekers in the audience, we've been solvers on the platform, helping you answer questions, but together we can shape the payments industry, and I encourage you to do that. That brings us to the end of this session. It brings us to the end of our conference, and I'd ask you to join me in thanking our panel for the sharing today. Thank you. As I wrap up, could I encourage you to complete the evaluation forms for this? Because even though this has been another great event, we all know that it can be better, but it's your input that helps shape that. So please let the organizers know what it is you want to see and hear next year. Good luck in everything that you're doing. I wish you success. I empathize and I sympathize with some of the challenges that you're facing, but I hope that when we come together again this time next year, that we will have made some progress in bringing those consumers that really matter to us a bit further forward in how they engage and grow our economies as nations in Europe. Thank you very much. Safe travels. See you again sometime soon. Thank you.